I recently sat down for coffee with a friend in Seoul who had just found out she was pregnant. Usually, that's a pop the champagne moment, but she looked like she'd just been handed a subpoena. There were no ultrasound photos on the table, only a tablet open to a 20-year financial projection. She wasn't picking out names. She was cross-referencing the acceptance rates of competitive kindergartens against the skyrocketing cost of English immersion tutors. When I offered my congratulations, she gave me a hollow, tired look. "I'm terrified," she whispered. "I feel like I'm launching a high-stakes startup with a 90% failure rate." I suggested that maybe she was overthinking it, that a child just needs love and a stable home. She laughed, but it was a sharp, clinical sound. "Love doesn't protect them from the grind," she said. "In this world, if you aren't providing a guaranteed path to the elite, you're just breeding a new member of the underclass. To me, bringing a child into this without a perfect plan feels irresponsible." That conversation stayed with me because it flips the entire global narrative about falling birth rates on its head. We're often told that populations are shrinking because the younger generation has become selfish or hedonistic, preferring luxury travel and pets over the sacrifice of family. But looking at her, trembling over a spreadsheet before the first trimester was even over, it felt like the exact opposite was true. This isn't a rejection of parenthood, it's a strategic abstention. It is a society so profoundly burdened by a sense of generational duty that the act of having a child has transformed from a biological joy into a high-stakes gamble on civilizational survival. It's not that they don't care about the future, it's that they care so much it's actually paralyzing them. It raises a haunting question. What happens to a culture when the weight of responsibility becomes so heavy that the only way to be a good parent is to refuse to be a parent at all? I mean, that term, strategic abstention, it completely changes the lens, doesn't it?
It really does. It takes it out of the realm of personal choice or, selfishness, which is the usual narrative.
Exactly. We're so used to hearing about apathy or lifestyle preferences.
Yeah.
But this suggests the complete opposite. It's not a withdrawal from responsibility. It's an overdose of it.
Precisely. You're moving from just the simple demographic statistic to something more like a sociological diagnosis. It's one thing to look at a total fertility rate, a TFR, and see it's below 0.8 in South Korea.
Which is just an unbelievable number.
It's staggering. But the standard interpretation is, well, the cost of living is too high. And that's true, but it's not the whole story. This idea of strategic abstention points to something deeper, more systemic.
We're talking about this speculation of perfection.
That's the framework. The unit cost of raising a child has just exploded. And I don't just mean in dollars or won. I mean in the sheer amount of social capital, the mental energy, the logistical planning.
All required to make sure that one child doesn't fail.
Exactly, to ensure they don't fail. And we need to be very clear about what failure means in this context.
Right. It's not about them being unhappy or unfulfilled in a broad sense. It's about them falling out of a very, very specific and shrinking elite class.
That's it, which I think is a perfect entry point into our first big theme today, this idea of educational Darwinism.
And how that system creates what the source material calls an industrial reserve army. We have to look at how this pressure actually looks on the ground, for the kids who are the raw material in this whole system.
The term industrial reserve army is so critical. It immediately reframes the child. They're not just a member of a family. They're a potential unit of national economic defense.
It's chilling.
Yeah.
So let's ground this with a story. The sources talk about a student named Minjun who lives in the Daichi-dong district of Seoul.
Ah, yes. Daichi-dong, often called the cradle of geniuses.
Right, but cradle sounds so gentle, nurturing. The way it's described, it sounds more like a high-pressure refinery for human capital.
That's a much better analogy.
Minjun is a teenager, but his life is it's regimented with a kind of military precision. His school day ending isn't the end of his day, it's just an intermission.
Before the real work begins.
Yes, before he goes to the Hagwons, these private cram schools that just light up the district all night long.
But Hagwon culture is really the engine of this entire phenomenon. It's where the parent's financial investment is directly converted into the child's, quote, human capital.
And Minjun's mother, her entire existence has basically been subsumed by this. She quit her career, not to be a homemaker in that traditional sense, but to become his full-time logistical manager.
His chief operating officer.
Exactly. She's managing schedules for tutors, for entrance exams, for all this supplementary education. And his success, his proficiency in calculus or physics, it's not framed as personal enrichment.
No, it's framed as a duty.
A non-negotiable contribution to South Korea's survival in the semiconductor race. the global tech war. It's heavy. The sources describe this kind of parenting as a rigorous filtering process.
It's not nurturing, it's selection. It's educational Darwinism. It feels like this fierce, almost militaristic kind of love where the survival of the civilization is prioritized over the spontaneity of the individual child.
And that's the civilizational logic that's at play here. Look, to a Western observer, or even to many people inside the system, it looks incredibly cruel. It looks like the theft of childhood.
It does.
But, and this is the hard part to grapple with, if you strip away the sentimentality and you just look at the cold, tangible outputs for the civilization, the system is working exactly as it was designed to.
What do you mean by outputs?
I mean dominance in the PISA rankings for education. I mean an incredibly dense, deep pipeline of STEM talent. This is what allows a resource-poor nation like South Korea or Taiwan to completely dominate some of the most complex, high-value sectors of the entire global economy.
So advanced semiconductors.
Advanced semiconductors, for one. You can't do that without a steady supply of world-class engineers and physicists, and this system, for all its cruelty, produces them. So the argument is that the pain, the suffering of individual families, of kids like Min Jun, is the price that's paid for the nation's industrial relevance.
In a cold geopolitical sense, yes. Yep. The parents are, in effect, conscripting their own children into an economic war. The nation-state's survival strategy depends on high-value human capital because it doesn't have oil or vast farmlands. So if Min Jun doesn't master advanced calculus, he isn't just failing a test. In this logic, he's failing to contribute to the nation's only viable path to survival.
And this explains the education fever that the data talks about. The fact that, over 75% of Korean children are in some form of private education?
It's a firewall. It's a national firewall against falling down the global value chain, against social stratification.
This also seems to connect directly to that concept from the National Institute for Defense Studies. The Type 3 countries.
Yes, the NIDS report provides a really useful taxonomy for this. They categorize countries, right? So Type 1 is a non-modernized society, high fertility, pretty straightforward. Type 2 is your classic Western modernization story. Think France, Sweden. Economic modernization happens over a long period, and eventually social modernization catches up. Gender roles evolve, support systems are built, and fertility stabilizes at a replacement level, more or less.
But Type 3 is different.
Type 3 is the East Asian model. It's rapid, compressed modernization. You go from an agrarian society to a high-tech powerhouse in maybe 2 generations. It's an economic miracle. But the social structures, the expectations, the gender roles, they haven't adapted at nearly the same speed.
So you've got a 2026 economy running on a 1980 social operating system.
That's a perfect way to put it. In these Type 3 societies, the expectation for elite performance is absolute. It's total. But the social support systems that would make achieving that performance feasible for, say, a dual-income family with 2 kids, they just aren't there.
So the parents are left to solve this impossible optimization problem on their own.
And how do they solve it? They reduce the number of variables. They reduce the quantity of children to 1 so they can maximize the quality investment in that single child. It becomes an all-or-nothing gamble.
You pour all the resources that might have gone to 3 kids into 1 because that's the only way you feel you can guarantee that 1 child survives the filter.
That's the line.
The unit cost idea is,
wow.
It really explains why simple cash subsidies don't work, which is something I want to get to in a bit. But first, let's pivot. We've talked about the industrial reserve army of the kids who are in this system. What about the people who look at this whole machine and decide not to feed it any new recruits?
This is the strategic abstention part of the equation. And it brings us to this fascinating comparison between the East Asian model of a demographic decline and the more familiar Western model.
The sources have this case study of a young couple in Shanghai. Their names are Wei and Li. And they identify as double income, no kids ginks.
A demographic we're very familiar with in the West.
Right, but in the West, it's often associated with what? Lifestyle maximization, more freedom, more travel, more leisure, less sacrifice.
The pursuit of personal fulfillment over generational duty, essentially.
But Wei and Li's story is completely different. They actually use the term strategic abstention. They describe how they sat down and basically conducted a feasibility study on having a child.
Like a business plan.
Exactly like a business plan. They analyzed the cost of what they called the social armor a child would need to survive.
That's a powerful metaphor, social armor.
Isn't it? It includes everything from the right elite bilingual kindergarten to owning a home in the right school district to the right extracurriculars that signal status. And they looked at all of this and they concluded, we can't guarantee success. We can't guarantee our child wins this battle.
And to them, not guaranteeing a win was tantamount to neglect.
Worse, they said that bringing a child into the world just to be average felt like a failure of generational responsibility. This just blows the whole selfishness narrative out of the water.
Yeah.
They aren't opting out so they can buy a nicer car. They're opting out because they feel they can't provide the perfect guaranteed path.
They're acting as a kind of a civilizational defense mechanism, refusing to produce a generation that they believe cannot compete at the absolute highest level.
It's a preemptive withdrawal from the race.
And this distinction is paramount.
Right.
When you look at demographic decline, you have to separate these two models. The Western model, as the sources frame it, is often characterized by entropy, by a sort of hyper-individualism.
Atomization of the self, right?
Yeah.
Instant gratification.
Yes. A focus on personal actualization that supersedes the idea of family continuity. In classical terms, you might even call it a form of decadence. But the East Asian model is something else entirely. It's a responsibility-induced collapse.
I love that phrase. It's not that the social fabric is weak and fraying. It's that the tension on the threads is too high, and it's tearing.
Perfectly put. The bonds of duty, of responsibility to the family and the nation are so incredibly strong that they are literally strangling the demographic future.
And you see this online, don't you? In the social media discourse in places like China and South Korea.
Absolutely. The dominant emotion you find in these discussions isn't a desire for hedonism or freedom. It's fear, a deep, palpable fear.
Fear of what, specifically?
Fear of the 996 work culture, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. Fear of the housing crisis. And fear of this concept of involution or Neiwan.
Can you unpack that a bit? Involution.
It's this idea of intense internal competition that leads to diminishing returns. The classic analogy is everyone in a movie theater standing up to get a better view.
The result being that everyone is now uncomfortable. And nobody can see any better than they could before.
Exactly. It's a zero-sum game of escalating effort for no collective gain. And people look at that and they feel exhausted. They see a future of endless, pointless struggle for their children.
And there's a deeper cultural layer to this, too. The Confucian reverence for lineage, for face.
It's unavoidable. The culture places an immense weight on bringing honor to the family unit. So in a hyper-meritocratic system like this, if you feel you can't add to that honor, if you can't guarantee your child will succeed, the safest move is not to play the game at all.
Because failure is so catastrophic.
Yeah.
The sources talk about falling off the single log bridge to success, meaning getting into a top-tier university. And they call it an ontological death.
It is a terrifying concept, isn't it? It implies that if you don't achieve this very specific, narrow form of success, you cease to exist in a socially meaningful way. You become invisible.
You become a member of the underclass.
That's the ultimate fear. And so parents would rather abstain from having a child altogether than risk bringing one into the world who might face that fate. It's framed as a kind of a preemptive mercy. They're protecting their potential children from the shame of perceived mediocrity.
When you lay it all out like that, it becomes so clear why money can't fix this. Which leads us perfectly into our third segment. The failure of all these financial incentives and this deeper crisis of status.
The policy response has been almost entirely fiscal, but the problem, as we're seeing, is ontological. It's about meaning and value.
And the sources give us this really powerful perspective from an engineer in Taiwan. He's in one of those high-tech manufacturing hubs. He's a product of the system. He climbed the meritocratic ladder himself.
He's the success story.
He is, and yet he talks about this ontological crisis among his peers. He's deeply critical of the government's approach of just throwing baby bonuses at the problem.
Because he sees firsthand that it's not about the money.
Exactly. He says money doesn't solve a crisis of respect. That's the core of his argument. The demographic crisis won't end as long as there is only one single respected pathway to a dignified life.
Which is elite academic credentials, followed by a job in a prestigious white-collar firm.
Right. So he calls for a pivot in what he terms state capacity. He argues that instead of just handing out cash, the state needs to focus on preserving physical industrial output, the real economy, and, crucially, creating multiple ways for a citizen to feel valued.
It's a critique of the monoculture of success. If the only way to have dignity is to be in the top 10% of academic performers, you've structurally designed a system where 90% of your population is incentivized to feel like a failure.
And no amount of money can fix that feeling.
None. The NADS report and other analyses really back this up. Governments in Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, they are brilliant at hard outputs. They can build world-class infrastructure, high-speed rail, subsidized semiconductor fabs, but they consistently fail at managing the soft variables.
Like status distribution.
It's like status. And as long as parenting is seen as this speculative act, this high-stakes gamble on a single narrow outcome, a few $1,000s in subsidies isn't going to convince risk-averse people to get their entire lives on it.
And this also ties back to the gender dynamics we mentioned earlier with the Type 3 country analysis. The idea that the workplace modernized, but the home didn't.
Yes, the mommy track versus career track is still a very stark choice for highly educated women in these societies. The system forces a binary decision. But what's important to add here is that even if you achieved perfect gender equality tomorrow,
the grind remains.
The educational grind remains the fundamental barrier. The role of the managerial mother is so deeply ingrained because the task is so demanding. Someone has to manage the Hagwon schedule. Someone has to be there to supervise homework at 11 p.m. Even with a fully supportive partner, you can't solve the basic problem of time and pressure if the state doesn't lower the stakes of the educational arms race itself.
So what the engineer is really saying is that the state needs to broaden the very definition of a valuable life. It's not about making it cheaper to get your kid into the race. It's about making it safe for your kid to run a different race entirely.
That's it. It requires a fundamental shift in national values. The very status anxiety that powers the economic miracle is now consuming the people who perform it.
Okay, so let's try to synthesize all of this. We're looking at a system that is, it's incredibly effective at its stated goal, producing technological and economic dominance. But the cost is that it's cannibalizing its own future population.
It's a profound paradox, and one way to look at it is through what you might call a Spenglerian gaze.
Oswald Spengler, the historian who saw civilizations as organisms with life cycles.
Exactly. From that perspective, you could interpret this demographic winter not as a failure, but as a kind of a spontaneous autoimmune response.
An autoimmune response. So the civilization is attacking itself.
It's attacking its own reproductive capacity, yes, because it perceives the current conditions of hypermodernity as a threat. The risk of producing a child who might fail, who might lose status, who might dilute the quality of the lineage. That risk is perceived as so existential that the civilization's immune system is, in a sense, shutting down the factory.
Wow. That's a powerful and deeply unsettling way to frame it.
It is, but notice the difference. This is not the Western model of dissolution, where the civilizational project seems to fall apart due to apathy or individualism. In East Asia, the society is agonizing over the quality of its offspring.
They're still engaged in the project of continuity.
They are profoundly engaged. You could almost argue they care about the future too much, so much that it's paralyzing them.
There's a grim sort of optimism in that. The fire hasn't gone out, it's burning so hot it's scorching the hearth.
That's a very good way to put it. Which means the path forward, as the Taiwanese engineer hinted at, isn't just about money or policy tweaks. It's about a deep evolution of cultural values.
You have to find a way to channel that relentless drive for excellence away from that single destructive bottleneck.
Away from pure academic credentialism, you have to create a society where raising a child is seen as an act of hope again, not a high-stakes, speculative gamble on a vanishingly small slot in the elite.
Reviving respect for technical trades, for the arts, for industry.
For the 100 different paths to a dignified and valuable life. If a society can do that, the crushing pressure on that single path begins to dissipate, the speculation ends, and perhaps real, sustainable living can begin.
It's an incredible journey to think about. We started this deep dive with my friend in Seoul, terrified, staring at a spreadsheet and the impossible cost of perfection. We've gone through the industrial machinery of this educational system, and we've looked at the quiet, profound defiance of those who simply refuse to participate.
It's a story playing out on a massive scale.
And I think the conclusion we have to draw is that these plummeting birth rates, they aren't a sign of people giving up. They're a sign of a burden of responsibility that has become so immense, so heavy, that it's become completely paralyzing. The fire of responsibility still burns. The task now is to figure out how to keep it from consuming the hearth.